All right, today we're going deep into some pretty heady philosophical territory.
Oh, yeah, we are, but I promise it'll be a fascinating journey.
I'm sure it will.
So you sent me this really interesting article
Yes.
from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy
Yeah.
on what's called the problem of the many.
The problem of the many.
Yes.
I'm always fascinated by seemingly simple things that turn out to be incredibly complex.
Well, what could be simpler than
Yeah.
a cloud, right?
Right, it's just a cloud.
Just a cloud, yeah.
But this article points out
Yes.
this fluffy white thing floating in the sky poses some serious challenges to our understanding of reality.
Yeah, because when you really start to think about it, defining a cloud becomes surprisingly difficult. Because it's not like a solid object
Right.
with clear boundaries.
Right.
It's a constantly shifting
Yeah.
collection of water droplets, and that's
Right.
where the problem of the many comes in.
Okay, so let's unpack this problem of the many. What's the core philosophical dilemma here?
So the dilemma is this. If a cloud is just a collection of water droplets,
Uh-huh.
and the density of those droplets changes gradually, how do we determine which specific collection actually constitutes the cloud?
Right.
Where does the cloud begin and end?
So I see where this is going.
Yeah.
If we can't pinpoint the exact boundaries,
Yeah.
does that mean there could be multiple clouds
Yes.
all occupying the same space?
Exactly. That's the crux of the problem.
Okay.
Any collection of droplets
Yeah.
could potentially qualify as a cloud,
Okay.
leading to a potentially infinite number of clouds, all overlapping with each other.
Hmm.
And that creates some serious logical inconsistencies.
Okay, this reminds me a bit of the ship of Theseus paradox.
Okay.
If you gradually replace all the parts of a ship,
Right.
is it still the same ship?
Yeah.
Here, it's like we're asking, if a cloud constantly gains and loses water droplets,
Yes.
is it still the same cloud?
That's a great analogy. And just like the ship of Theseus paradox, the problem of the many forces us to confront fundamental questions about identity, change, and the nature of objects.
So how have philosophers
Yeah.
attempted to grapple with this cloudy conundrum?
Yeah.
What solutions have they proposed?
Well, as you might expect with any philosophical problem,
Yeah.
there's no single agreed-upon answer.
Right.
But the Stanford Encyclopedia article outlines several different approaches,
Okay.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. I immediately went to the nihilism part.
Okay, yes.
Are they suggesting that clouds don't exist at all?
It does sound radical, doesn't it?
It does.
But the nihilist argument,
Okay.
championed by Peter Unger,
Okay.
claims that the concept of a cloud is just too inconsistent to work. If we can't define its boundaries,
Right.
how can we say it truly exists as a distinct entity?
I can see the logic there, but it feels counterintuitive.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm looking out the window right now.
yeah,
I definitely see a cloud.
right. And that's one of the main objections to nihilism.
Right.
It clashes with our everyday experience
Yeah.
of the world.
Yeah.
But the nihilist would argue that our perception of a cloud
Uh-huh.
is just a convenient simplification,
Okay.
a way of making sense of a complex reality that doesn't fit neatly into
Yeah.
our linguistic category.
So it's not that our senses are deceiving us.
Correct.
It's that our language fails to capture the true nature of clouds.
Precisely.
Okay.
Nihilism about clouds is less about denying their existence
Okay.
and more about questioning our ability to define and categorize them
Right.
in a way that avoids contradiction.
Okay. So nihilism throws out the baby with the bathwater,
Yes.
so to speak.
Yes.
What about the opposite extreme?
Okay.
The article mentions something called overpopulation.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Overpopulation takes the opposite approach.
Okay.
It says, what if every possible combination of
Mm.
water droplets is
Yeah.
considered a cloud? Instead of having no clouds, we end up with an infinite number of them,
Right.
all overlapping and coexisting.
Wow. Talk about a crowded sky.
Yes,
I imagine this solution creates its own set of problems.
it definitely does.
Yeah.
For starters, it leads to a sort of ontological explosion
Okay.
where not just clouds, but everything becomes infinitely multiplied.
Right.
It stretches the concept of existence to a point where it loses all practical meaning.
Okay. So both nihilism and overpopulation seem a bit extreme.
Yes.
Are there any solutions that fall somewhere in between these two poles?
There are. thankfully.
I mean-
One is called brutalism.
Brutalism.
Yeah, it takes a more pragmatic approach,
Okay.
suggesting that it's simply a brute fact about the universe which collection of droplets counts as the cloud.
Brutalism.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit harsh.
It does, a little bit.
Are they saying there's no rhyme or reason to it, just an arbitrary designation?
Essentially, yes.
Huh.
Brutalism argues that some facts about the world are just fundamental, and there's no deeper explanation for why things are the way they are. It's a bit like saying, that's just how it is,
Yeah.
and leaving it at that.
Right. It's a straightforward solution, I'll give it that.
Yes.
But I can see how some philosophers might find it unsatisfying.
Yeah.
It doesn't really offer any insights into the nature of clouds or how we conceptualize them.
You're right. It's a bit like giving up on the question altogether.
Right.
But brutalism does have its proponents
Okay.
who argue that sometimes accepting the inexplicable is the most reasonable approach.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's move away from those three.
Sure.
What other solutions are out there?
Well, one intriguing perspective is relative identity.
Relative identity.
Yes.
Okay.
It proposes that the different collections of water droplets
Okay.
might be distinct as fusions of water droplets,
Uh,
but identical as clouds.
wait, how can something be both different and the same? Isn't that a contradiction?
That's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The key idea here is that identity can be relative.
Okay.
So those different collections of droplets
Right.
might be different in terms of their specific composition,
Okay.
but they're all the same in terms of being a cloud.
It's like saying that you're the same person you were yesterday.
Exactly.
Even though you've gained and lost cells,
Exactly.
your identity persists despite those changes.
Relative identity allows for a kind of continuity over time,
Okay.
even when the underlying constituents are in flux.
Okay, I think I'm starting to grasp this relative identity idea.
Okay.
But I imagine it has its own set of challenges.
It does.
Like, what are they?
For instance, if all those different collections of droplets are the same cloud,
Yeah.
shouldn't they have the same properties?
Okay.
But what if one collection contains a specific droplet that another doesn't?
Right, yeah.
Does that create a contradiction?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It seems like we're still grappling with the issue of how to define the boundaries of the cloud,
Yes,
even if we accept this relative identity concept.
you're right.
Yeah.
Relative identity might provide a framework for understanding how a cloud can persist through change,
Okay.
but it doesn't fully resolve the question of which specific collection of droplets constitutes the cloud.
All right, so relative identity, an interesting concept, but maybe not the ultimate solution.
Right.
What else have philosophers come up with?
Let's consider partial identity, a view suggesting those different cloud candidates are almost, but not quite identical. They're similar enough to all be considered clouds,
Okay.
not identical enough to be multiple clouds.
So like siblings
You can-
sharing some common features,
Yeah,
but ultimately distinct individuals.
that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Partial identity delves into how we use language to categorize and count objects.
Right.
It asks how much difference is required before we say we have two distinct things.
I can already see some potential issues with this approach.
Okay.
What about something like a house with an attached garage?
Yeah.
Is it one house or two?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
The problem with partial identity
Yeah.
is that it seems to break down when applied to complex objects with interconnected parts.
Right.
It's difficult to determine the threshold of difference that separates one thing from another.
So partial identity, a valiant effort, but maybe not a universal solution.
Exactly.
Okay.
It highlights the challenges of trying to apply clear-cut categories
Yeah.
to a world that often defies easy classification.
Okay, one more question before we move on.
Okay.
What about the idea
Yeah.
that the problem isn't with the clouds themselves,
Yeah.
but with our word for them?
Hmm.
What if cloud is just too vague a term to have a precise definition?
You're onto something there. That leads us to the vagueness solution,
Okay.
which argues that the whole issue stems from the imprecise nature of language.
So are they saying we're just using the wrong tool for the job?
Yeah.
It's like trying to measure a cloud's volume with a ruler?
In a sense, yes.
Okay.
The vagueness solution suggests that cloud might just be too fuzzy a concept to pin down with absolute precision.
Okay, but how do we deal with that vagueness from a philosophical standpoint?
Yeah.
Do we just throw up our hands and say, it's all relative?
Not quite.
Okay.
There's a fascinating approach to vagueness called supervaluationism.
Supervaluationism.
Yes,
Okay.
which offers a more nuanced way of handling these fuzzy terms.
Supervaluationism. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So supervaluationism argues that while a term like cloud might be vague in its everyday use,
Okay.
we can make it more precise
Yeah.
by adding additional information or context. It's like bringing a blurry photograph into focus by adjusting the lens.
So we're essentially saying that cloud has multiple possible interpretations,
Yes,
and we need to narrow down the meaning to make it clear.
exactly.
Hey.
A precisification, as it's called, could specify the minimum number of water droplets needed to qualify as a cloud, or the specific density and arrangement of those droplets.
Okay.
But the key is that this precisification must be consistent
Right.
with our general understanding of the term.
So we're not just making up arbitrary definitions.
Exactly.
They have to fit with how we normally use the word cloud.
Right. And according to supervaluationism,
Right.
a sentence is considered true if it's true under all admissible precisifications.
So even though cloud is inherently vague,
Yes.
we can still say there's a cloud in the sky
Yes.
because no matter how we define cloud,
Right.
there's always going to be some collection of droplets that fits the bill.
Precisely.
Okay.
Supervaluationism allows us to maintain the truth of everyday statements about clouds,
Okay.
even while acknowledging the vagueness inherent in the term itself.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this could work.
Good.
But I imagine there are objections to supervaluationism as well.
Of course, no philosophical solution is without its critics. For instance, some argue that supervaluationism struggles with indirect references to vague objects.
Okay.
Let's say you point to a cloud and say, that is a cloud.
Yeah.
Later, I tell someone else, he said that that is a cloud.
Right.
Intuitively, my statement seems true.
Okay.
But some argue that supervaluationism would have trouble accounting for this kind of indirect reference,
Okay.
as the precise meaning of cloud might have shifted
Yeah.
between the two utterances.
So even supervaluationism has its wrinkles,
It does.
but it seems like a promising framework
Yeah.
for dealing with the vagueness of cloud.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And it highlights how our language and concepts
Right.
can both illuminate and obscure the complexities of reality.
My brain is starting to feel a bit overloaded.
Understandable.
I think we need to pause here
Okay.
and pick up this cloudy conversation in our next segment.
I agree.
But we're just getting started.
Yes.
There's a whole sky full of philosophical puzzles yet to explore.
I can't wait to dive back in.
See you the next part.
See you then. Welcome back.
Okay, I have, and I'm ready for more.
Good.
So we were just starting to get into the nitty-gritty of the problem of the many.
Yes.
Where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked about how the very nature of parthood might be more complex than
Yeah.
we initially thought. But what if we zoom out even further
Okay.
and question the relationship between composition, what something is made of, and identity?
Okay.
What makes something that specific thing?
Okay, so instead of getting lost in the droplets,
Yeah,
we're stepping back to consider the whole cloud as a concept.
precisely.
Right.
Some philosophers argue that we need to distinguish between the cloud constitutor and the cloud itself.
Cloud constitutor.
Yeah.
That sounds like we're building a cloud from scratch.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that?
Think of it this way. You are not the same collection of cells you were years ago, but you're still you.
Right.
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 So the cloud constitutor is like your cells always
That.
changing,
Yeah.
but part of a larger, consistent you.
So the cloud constitutor is like the physical stuff that
Yeah.
makes up the cloud, the water droplets.
Yes.
While the cloud itself is something more
Yes.
than just the sum of its parts.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's the idea that there's a difference between the material composition of a cloud
Right.
and its identity as a distinct entity.
So like the ingredients versus the finished cake.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
The cloud constitutor is like the batter, eggs, and flour,
Oh.
while the cloud itself is the baked cake.
Okay.
They're related, but not identical.
Okay. I'm following so far.
Good.
But how does this distinction help us
Yeah.
solve the problem of the many?
Philosophers like Mark Johnston and E.J. Lowe argue that clouds and cloud constitutors
Sorry.
have different identity conditions.
Okay.
A cloud can change over time,
Right.
lose some droplets,
Yeah.
gain others, and
Mhm.
still remain the same cloud.
Okay.
But the cloud constitutor, the specific collection of droplets at any given moment, is
Right.
constantly in flux.
So the cloud is kind of like a river,
Yes.
always changing but fundamentally the same.
Yes.
While the cloud constitutor is more like a snapshot
Exactly.
of the river in a specific moment.
Exactly.
Okay.
And because they have different identity conditions,
Yeah.
we can't simply equate the two
Right.
it's a category mistake.
Gotcha.
Like saying a football team
Right.
is just a collection of individual players.
Okay, so we're separating the cloud's essence
Yeah.
from its physical form. Interesting.
Yes.
I'm guessing there are objections to this view
Of course.
as well.
Yes.
What are they?
David Lewis, for instance,
Okay.
argued that this solution is too metaphysically extravagant.
Okay.
We're essentially doubling the number of entities
Right.
by introducing these cloud constitutors on top of the clouds themselves.
So it's like we're solving one problem,
Yes.
but creating another.
Exactly.
Talk about a philosophical trade-off.
But proponents of this view,
Right.
like Lowe, argue that these additional entities
Right.
are necessary to account for how objects persist over time.
Okay.
Think about it. You're not the same collection of cells you were 10 years ago, but you're still you, right?
That's true. So are they saying that these cloud constitutors
Yes.
help explain how clouds maintain their identity
Yes.
despite constant change?
Precisely.
Okay.
They provide a sort of underlying continuity
Okay.
that allows the cloud to exist as a distinct entity over time.
Okay. I could see how that might address Lewis's concern about extravagance,
Okay.
but are there any other objections?
Well, Lewis also pointed out that even if we accept these cloud constitutors,
Right.
we still haven't solved the original problem. We've just shifted it from clouds to cloud constitutors.
Okay.
Now we have multiple possible cloud constitutors for each cloud,
Right.
leading to the same dilemma.
So it's like we've just kicked the can down the road.
In a way, yes, but Lowe argues that this isn't a major issue because cloud constitutor isn't really a concept we use in everyday language. We don't have strong intuitions about them.
Right.
So the fact that there might be multiple cloud constitutors for a single cloud isn't as problematic.
Okay. I see his point.
Good.
But I'm sure Lewis had a counterargument.
He did. Lewis claimed that each cloud constitutor
Okay.
is so similar to the cloud it constitutes
Uh-huh.
that it basically looks and acts like a cloud.
Right.
So if we were initially worried about having too many clouds, we should now be worried about having too many clouds plus too many cloud constitutors.
So like we've doubled the trouble.
Exactly.
Okay.
But Lowe points out that this objection assumes that being a cloud is an intrinsic property,
Right.
something inherent to the object itself.
Right.
He argues that being a cloud is actually an extrinsic property,
Right.
meaning it depends on factors outside the object, like
Right.
its history, context,
Yeah.
and its relationship to other objects.
So are they saying that a cloud constitutor
Yes.
might look like a cloud in isolation,
Yes.
but wouldn't actually be considered a cloud in the grand scheme of things?
Exactly.
Oh.
Its cloudhood depends on its relationship
Cool.
to the larger cloud it constitutes,
Yeah.
not just its own internal properties.
Okay, I'm starting to see the nuances of this solution.
Okay.
It's like we're shifting from a purely material definition of a cloud
Yeah,
to a more relational one.
precisely.
Okay.
And that shift in perspective helps address
Okay.
some of the challenges posed by the problem of the many.
Of course, I imagine there are even more objections lurking out there.
Always. Philosophy is a never-ending debate.
Right.
And the beauty of it is that
Okay.
every objection, every counter-argument
Right.
pushes us to refine our thinking and
Yeah.
explore new possibilities.
Well, on that note, I'm eager to continue exploring this cloud of confusion. What other mind-bending solutions have philosophers come up with?
Let's dive into a solution that challenges some fundamental assumptions about how we categorize and count objects.
Okay.
It's a really innovative way to look at the problem
Okay.
and opens up some fascinating philosophical doors.
Okay, so hit me with this innovative solution.
Okay.
What fundamental assumptions are we shaking up this time?
Well, this one challenges the idea that objects must have clearly defined parts.
Okay.
It suggests that the relationship between parts and wholes might be fuzzier
Okay.
than we traditionally think.
Fuzzy parts. So are we saying a cloud's edge is like a blurry line
Yeah.
in a painting?
Yeah.
Where it's hard to say exactly where the cloud ends and the sky begins?
That's a great visual.
Yeah.
This approach delves into the world of fuzzy logic,
Okay.
where things aren't just true or false, but
Yeah.
can exist in degrees of truth.
Okay.
It's like saying a water droplet
Okay.
can be partially part of a cloud with a certain degree of membership.
So we're basically saying there's a spectrum of cloudness,
Yes.
and a droplet can fall somewhere along that spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a dimmer switch where
Yeah.
the light isn't just on or off,
Right.
but can have varying levels of brightness.
Okay, so how does this fuzzy logic
Yeah.
help us solve the problem of the many?
Well, philosopher Peter Van Inwagen,
Okay.
a proponent of this view,
Okay.
argues that this fuzzy parthood allows us to say there's only one cloud because we can assign different degrees of membership to the droplets.
Okay.
Those on the outer edges might be considered partially part of the cloud,
Okay.
while those in the dense center are full-fledged members.
So it's like a club with different levels of membership.
Yeah.
You have your inner circle, your associate members,
Yeah.
and those who are just kind of on the periphery.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
And this fuzzy membership
Ah.
allows us to maintain the intuition
Yeah.
that there is a single unified cloud while acknowledging the vagueness of its boundaries.
Okay, so I see the appeal of this solution.
Okay.
It seems to strike a balance
Yeah.
between the extremes of nihilism and overpopulation,
Yes.
but I'm guessing it's not without its challenges.
You're right. One objection is that even with fuzzy logic,
Okay.
we still need a way to determine the cloud's identity.
Yeah.
If a droplet can be partially part of the cloud, how do we decide
Yeah.
which collection of droplets with their various degrees of membership actually constitutes the cloud?
So it's like we've traded one boundary problem for another.
Exactly.
Okay.
And another challenge is that this fuzzy parthood
Right.
seems to contradict our everyday understanding of how objects are composed.
Right.
We tend to think of parts as being either in or out, not somewhere in between.
So it's like saying a puzzle piece can be partially in the puzzle,
Yes.
which just doesn't make sense.
Precisely.
Right.
It challenges our basic intuitions about the physical world.
Okay, so fuzzy logic offers an interesting perspective, but maybe not a complete solution.
Right.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the problem of the many,
Yes.
what are we left with? Do we have any clear understanding of what a cloud actually is?
Well, I think the key takeaway from all of this is
Yeah.
that there is no single universally agreed upon answer.
Mm.
The problem of the many
Right.
is a testament to the complexity of metaphysics
Yeah.
and the limitations of our language
Right.
in trying to describe the world.
So are we saying that clouds are ultimately unknowable? That we're doomed to wander in this philosophical fog forever?
Not at all.
Okay.
I think the real value of this philosophical journey is not necessarily finding a definitive answer,
Okay.
but rather appreciating the depth and nuance of the question itself.
Okay.
The problem of the many forces us to confront fundamental assumptions about identity, parthood, and even the nature of reality.
It's like we've climbed a mountain, and even though the peak might be shrouded in mist, the view along the way has been breathtaking.
Exactly. And the very fact that we can engage in this kind of philosophical inquiry,
Yeah.
explore different perspectives, and grapple with complex concepts is a testament to the power and beauty
Right.
for human thought.
Well, before we let our listener go,
Yes.
any final thoughts you'd like to leave them with? Any parting wisdom to help them navigate this cloud of confusion?
I would encourage them to embrace the ambiguity.
Okay.
The problem of the many is a reminder
Yeah.
that the world is full of wonder, mystery, and things that defy easy categorization.
Right.
It's a call to approach reality
Right.
with a sense of curiosity, open-mindedness,
Yeah.
and a willingness to challenge our assumptions.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Thank you.
And it leaves us with a wonderful sense of possibility
Yes.
and a renewed appreciation for the philosophical puzzles hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. So next time you look up at a cloud,
Yeah.
remember, it's not just a fluffy white thing in the sky. It's a gateway to a world of philosophical wonder.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the mysteries of the universe, one cloud at a time.